So we have the entity set up. Let's have the repository for it. So this will be an interface in here. And we're going to name this as fraud check history repository. Press enter. And let me put this full screen. This extends JPA repository. This is check history or fraud check history, and then integer. Oops, not that, but integer, just like that. And let me put it like that. And now let's have the controller. So here, or let's have the service. So I'm going to basically fraud check and then service. So in here, let's just have a class, and then I want to name this as service. And this time I think let's not use records because I don't want to confuse you guys. So I'm going to change the customer as well to use a normal class, because I think it's easy for anyone to understand whether you're not using the latest version of Java or not. But in here, what we want to do is just to perform a check for a particular customer. So here I'm going to say public, and then Boolean is fraudulent, and then customer, and we're going to take the customer ID. So integer customer ID, just like that. And in here, so what we're going to do is basically, for now, we're going to make sure that everybody, it's not a fraudster. So I'm just going to return false. So let's just return false. But obviously, if you were doing this for real, maybe you would use a third-party system, or you could have your own system that checks whether a customer is a fraudster or not, maybe checking their email against so on and so forth, and all kind of things that you can do. But in our case, we're just going to return false in here, but also we want to store the fact that there was a check that took place. So private, final, and then fraud. And then we want the history repository, just like that, and then add to a constructor parameter. And there we go. Now, obviously, I want to basically store the fact that this took place, dot, and then save. And then inside, I'm going to say fraud check history, dot, and then builder. And in between, so before I build, I want to set a couple of things. I want to set the, so set is fraudster. I'm going to say false in here, and dot. Let's also set the customer ID. So this will be customer ID. And finally, I want to set when this took place. So created at, this will be local date now, just like that. And then we build, and then we basically store this in our database, and we are storing the fact that a check took place. Now here, let's annotate this with add and then service. There we go. And let's also have the controller, so class, and then I'm going to say fraud controller. This will have at rest controller, at request mapping. This will be API /v1 / and then fraud, and then dash check. There we go. And this will be a post and then mapping. And here we're going to say public, and the return type will be a fraud check response. So I'm going to say fraud and then check response is fraudster. And let's just create this. So this will be a record. So create record, and inside I'm going to say is and then fraudster, and this will be type Boolean. So this is all I need. Then if you want to include more things in it, then you can. Now for this post mapping, all I need is to receive the customer ID. So here, this will be a path variable or a path in here. And I'm going to say this as customer ID, just like that. And if I put this full screen, we say this will be a path at, and then path, and then variable. This will be customer ID. The type is integer, customer ID. And let me just put this like that. And now I can have the service. So private fraud, and then check service. There we go. And make sure that this is final, and add this to constructor. There we go. And now all I need to do is just say fraud, check service, and then is fraud, pass the customer ID. And all I'm going to do is extract this to a variable. And I want to say is fraudulent customer. Put this on a new line so you can see everything properly. Now I'm going to say return new fraud check response, and then pass is, and then fraudulent customer. And I've just realized that this must be a get mapping instead of a post mapping, and import that. And also, instead of us doing all of these shenanigans, what we're going to do is basically having private final and then the constructor in here. I kind of forgot that we have Lombok, so let's just in here. And if I go back for a second, so we just have to delete the constructor, and in here we can say at, and then all our constructor, and you can see the error goes away. Let's just do this for basically everything. So the check service, so we'll delete the constructor in here, and we pass the annotation, so at all our constructor. Let's take this and let's do the same for customer. So customer service, so we'll change this from the record to a regular class. And in here, let's just take this from here, private final customer repository, and stick the annotation in there. Beautiful stuff. Let's also do it for the controller. So annotation in there, take this guy, change it to a class instead, and then private, paste that in, and let's make this final. So the records gives us a bunch of things that we don't need for our services, and I think this is much better. Okie dokie. So now that we have this fraud controller, next let's understand how the communication between microservices will work.